Right now you're looking at Mime Jr., a Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 4. And here we have Beta Mime Jr., a Pokemon that was scrapped during development of Gen 2. And the time difference between these iterations is over 8 years. Pokemon Cut Content. The extensive planning that goes into creating a new generation of Pokemon is not to be understated. After all, for every 50 new creatures, there are likely 100 more that were planned and never made it into the final game. But occasionally fans will discover a couple dozen of these cut creatures, and note similarities with new Pokemon, or straight up redesigned cases. Take for instance, the infamous Tirtouga situation. Tirtouga debuted in Pokemon Black and White, and when those games came out, many fans noticed that Tirtouga had a very familiar design. This turtle-like creature bears a striking resemblance to Tirtouga, and was featured on the cover of the gaming magazine in April 1997. Surprisingly, that's the same month the first episode of the Pokemon anime aired, which is where we saw Ho-Oh for the first time. However, despite its early spotlight, we've never seen an in-game sprite of this mysterious turtle Pokemon. So considering the timing of when this creature was shown, it was likely just an early drawn concept and cut extremely early on. But given how public this cut Pokemon design has been, it could very likely have inspired Tirtouga. Overall, I like the colors on the old Tirtouga more, so I'm gonna rate this a downgrade. Leafeon is another example. In the lead up to Gen 2, there were only 3 Eeveelutions, with the elemental duo of a water and fire Eevee, along with an electric Eevee. The logical next step seemed to be a grass type Eeveelution, with plenty of room to expand for more. However, when Gold and Silver made its final cut, only Umbreon and Espeon made the Johto roster. But then came the Spaceworld demo leak, unveiling the existence of a planned grass type Eeveelution, complete with a sprite ready for inclusion in Gold and Silver. So why was it axed? To this day the reasons remain shrouded in mystery, but speculation points to storage limitations. Considering that Gamefreak squeezed all of Kanto into the post-game midway through development, adding 3 brand new Eeveelutions may have seemed a bit excessive. Hence the decision was made to prioritize the 2 that capitalized on new evolution mechanics. And it wasn't until Diamond and Pearl that Gamefreak decided to revisit the concept of Leafeon. Makes you wonder though, just how many Eeveelutions have been planned, but never even made it to a sprite stage. Overall, I rate this an upgrade. The next Pokemon on our list is Lickilicky, another Pokemon officially introduced in Gen 4, but originally planned for Gen 2. Unlike Leafeon, I have to admit that I actually prefer the original design. You know what's strange? I'm almost certain that the new Lickilicky has a shorter tongue than its pre-evolution, Lickitung. That alone gives Lickitung the impression of being the evolution, whereas the scrap design boasted a longer and more majestic tongue. I do understand the changes. They aimed for rounder and cuter aesthetics, but everything about the modern Lickilicky, down to its patterns, just feels a bit lackluster. And that's coming from someone who absolutely loves Gen 4 Pokemon designs. It's a shame, but in my book, this one's definitely a downgrade. Up next we have Burmy. Now, Burmy might not be a Pokemon you'd expect to be scrapped and later reintroduced. Like, does anyone even use this Pokemon? Burmy fans, if you're watching, please reveal yourselves in the comments. But this little creature's story doesn't come from a Spaceworld demo. Instead, it comes from an extremely early Korean build of Pokemon Gold and Silver. And get this, the old Burmy design even had an evolution that looked a lot like Mothim, the evolution of modern Burmy, so you could say it's like a bonus scrapped redesign. Now that I think about it, Gen 4 brought back quite a few scrapped Pokemon from Gen 2. And considering that Gen 4 also gave us remakes of Gold and Silver, it's not crazy to think that Gamefreak might have found inspiration from archived Gold and Silver content while planning Heart Gold and Soul Silver. The next one has a rather unique case. Of course, Ledian was introduced in Gen 2, and most beta enthusiasts will tell you that this is the early beta design of Ledian. But what if I told you that is not the earliest Ledian design? You see, right here is supposed to be an early design of Beedrill. Yes, I know it's a little confusing considering it looks nothing like a bee, but this specific design looks very similar to Ledian. I mean, it's a 4-armed flying creature with boots and antlers and even with a big circle on its body. Perhaps Beedrill's evolution line was supposed to be similar to Ledian. It's not far-fetched to suggest that scrapped Gen 1 designs may have inspired at least a few Gen 2 designs. Plus, the Gen 1 design doesn't even look like a Pokemon, so I definitely rate this an upgrade. Speaking of far-fetched, our next Pokemon is Sirfetch'd, a Pokemon introduced in Sword and Shield. Leaks have revealed that an evolution to Farfetch'd was originally planned for Gen 2. And I'm not gonna lie, this scrap design is just leagues better, and I really wish we got this in the final game. Every fan art I see of this Pokemon just makes Sirfetch'd look terrible in comparison, from a mask-like design, to the Lugia-esque arms, to the damn feather texture. This design feels like it's been given a lot more love, instead of, yo, let's make Farfetch'd white, slap a big celery stick on it, and call it a day. I'm a huge fan of James Turner's art direction too, but this one was not it, and definitely a downgrade in my opinion. Venturing into the Hoenn region, we encounter Sharpedo, the shark Pokemon introduced in Ruby and Sapphire. You might be surprised to learn that this wasn't Gamefreak's first or even second attempt at creating a shark Pokemon. It was actually their third. Yes, that's right. Some form of Sharpedo was planned for the first two generations, and sprites were created both times. However, it wasn't until the third generation that this creature made the final cut. But I'll be honest, the Gen 1 design isn't that great. I still think I'd use it because I like to use weird looking Pokemon, but that's not exactly a compliment. The Gen 2 design actually looks pretty good. It's a shame it was cut. I'm guessing the reason was that it looked too much like an actual shark instead of a Pokemon. I'm extremely mixed upon these designs, so I'll have to rate this both an upgrade and a downgrade. Going back to the Korean leak, we have another design that allegedly returned in Gen 4, and it's none other than Cherubi. Now come on, there's no way Diamond and Pearl just coincidentally had so many rehashed designs of scrapped Gen 2 Pokemon. Honestly, I like both of these Pokemon, but Cherubi's just too cute and takes the cake by a mile. Definite upgrade. Moving further up the generations, we reach Pokemon Sun and Moon, where we saw the introduction of Komala, the very first koala Pokemon. Much like Tortuga, this is perhaps one of the more notable cases of a scrapped Pokemon being redesigned. From the Pokemon size to the pose in the artwork, there's not much difference to pinpoint. I'm just wondering why it took Gamefreak nearly 20 years to revisit this design, or even create a koala Pokemon. Since there's not really a difference between the two, I'm gonna give this a neutral rating. Next on our list is Tyranitar. You might have spotted one of its beta designs earlier in the video, but that looked pretty similar to the final version, right? So surely there must have been some form of an earlier Tyranitar concept, long before it graced the cover of that magazine. Myself and many others believe that this cut sprite is the earliest Tyranitar design. It's a Godzilla-inspired Pokemon that was shelved during Gen 1 development. You might wonder why it's so small, but remember, this is just the front sprite, and in Gen 1, front sprite scaled down the Pokemon sizes tremendously, so this Pokemon must have been much larger in actual artwork. And the speculation doesn't end there. The sprite had a pre-evolution that had a striking similarity to Larvitar. I mean, it's basically the same thing without the horn. Overall, Tyranitar boasts one of the most standout designs in Gen 2, and if it was cut from Gen 1, I understand why Gamefreak couldn't let this concept go. Definite upgrade. So far I've covered all the scrapped Pokemon with concrete redesigns, but I also wanted to delve into scrapped concepts of Pokemon that were revisited. Let me give you an example. This flying squirrel Pokemon was cut during Gold and Silver's development, a concept that hadn't been revisited until Black and White with Emolga. Similarly, the concept of a fire-type fox Pokemon was axed too, with many comparing the design to Fennekin. For Gen 1 there were cactus, crocodile and squid Pokemon that were scrapped, all concepts that later returned in future generations. There were even deer and elephant Pokemon that were scrapped, only to return in Gen 2 as Stantler and Donphan respectively. The entire Popplio evolution line draws similarities to a scrapped water starter from Gold and Silver. And lastly, a lion Pokemon that looks like it totally could have been a legendary Pokemon. Many speculate that this could have been scrapped in favor of Lugia. Gamefreak eventually created Solgaleo, the cover art legendary of Pokemon Sun. And that about wraps up every cut Pokemon and concept that was redesigned for new games, as of right now. The truth is, there will probably be way more to come. But of course, let me know which one you guys like the most in the comments. My personal favorite was the original Sirfetch'd evolution, while my favorite redone concept was Fennekin. Curious to see what you guys think, and I'm gonna be posting a lot more content revolving around Pokemon and other topics, so if you're interested, subscribe to stay tuned, like this video, and I'll see you in the next one.